What would have been considered the printer's craft, a crucial aspect of his poetic identity. Born in Hempstead, Long Island, May 31st, 1819, Whitman became an apprentice printer on the Long Island Patriot at the age of 12. He learned how to set type in 1833 under the Patriot's foreman printer, William Hartshorne, working at a hand press that was not unlike those in this room. Whitman experienced firsthand how persons, thoughts, actions, and events could quickly be set into typeface and communicated to thousands of readers. It was Whitman's career as a printer and journalist that enabled him to see how to engage the public with his views on literary and political matters. His impassioned support of American democracy drew on the pride he took in his craft as a printer. In 1842, as chief editor for the New York Aurora, he contributed reviews and essays that defined and defended the democratic ideal of American literature. Whitman's arrival in New York City coincided with a revolution in print technology that was responsible for the mass production of American newspapers costing no more than 1 or 2 cents. After he left the Aurora in 1843, Whitman supported himself primarily by writing prose fiction and doing piecework for a variety of papers: The Tatler, Sunday Times, Statesman, Plebeian, Sun Democrat, Mirror. When the editor of the leading Brooklyn paper, the Daily Eagle, died in 1846, the owners hired Whitman to fill that post. In 1848, Whitman left New York for a brief stint in New Orleans as editor of the New Orleans Crescent. He returned to Brooklyn in the autumn of 1848 as an aspiring poet and started a Free Soil newspaper called the Brooklyn Freeman. Much of Whitman's poetry and prose drew on his immersion in the panorama of activities that took place daily in Manhattan and Brooklyn from 1838 to 1853. The broad reach of Whitman's newspaper writing enabled him to experiment with different personae, out of which the poet of Song of Myself forged a composite man en masse who bragged that he contained multitudes. But what brought about this monumental transformation in Whitman from the journalist and editor to America's foremost national bard? Whitman attributed one of the causes for this transformation to Ralph Waldo Emerson, who, as we've seen, also underwent a decisive shift in his self-representation from a Unitarian minister to the American scholar. Whitman had indeed written a report on Emerson's 1842 lecture, The Poet, for that New York Aurora. "I was simmering, simmering, simmering," Whitman famously asserted. "Emerson brought me to a boil." And no matter the Whitman cadences discernible in the following lines from Emerson's essay, The Poet, it's unlikely that Emerson bears primary responsibility for the eruption of Whitman's unique poetic voice. Our log rolling, our stumps and their politics, our fisheries, our Negroes and Indians, our boasts and our repudiations, the wrath of rogues and the pusillanimity of honest men, the northern trade, the southern planting, the western clearing, Oregon and Texas as yet unsung. Yet America is a poem in our eyes. Its ample geography dazzles the imagination, and it will not wait for meters. Emerson may have indeed meant to return Whitman to that simmering state of mind when he famously quipped that Leaves of Grass struck him as an odd mixture of the Bhagavad Gita and the New York Tribune. But Emerson's offhand remark attests to a striking fact, namely that Whitman the poet never in fact stopped viewing his work through the eyes of a printer. Whitman knew how to set type, and he knew how his books were printed and bound. When he brought the manuscript of Leaves of Grass to the Rome Brothers studio in 1855, Whitman himself set a few pages of type for the first edition. And he chose the large paper format that gave his long lines space to extend across the page. Whitman was fascinated in particular with the metamorphosis of his voice and bodily identity into the materialities of typeface like this and paper like this. His foundational poetic conceit involved turning the drifting catalog of random human types into printed characters on a page. As a printer, he was conscious of the ways different typefaces, page sizes, titles could alter a poem's significance. He did not conceive of paper, book jacket, and type as disposable vehicles. For him, they were living bodies. He wanted physical involvement in the production of Leaves of Grass as a physical object. And he construed the printed poems as the primary means whereby he could become physically involved with his readers. As a newspaper editor, he'd taken pleasure and pride in what he then called the curious kind of sympathy that arises in the mind of a newspaper conductor with the public he serves. The production of Leaves of Grass enabled Whitman to consummate his desire for intimate contact by galvanizing print and paper into a body electric, interanimating writer and reader. Listen to these lines. Come closer to me. Push close, my lovers, and take the best I possess. I was chilled with the cold type and cylinder and wet paper between us. I passed so poorly with paper and types. I must pass with the contact of bodies and souls. Can you cite lines from Leaves of Grass that brought about an experience of intimate communion with the poet? What sense do you make of this exclamation? Camarado, this is no book. Who touches this book touches a man.